Does that seem like an odd way to end the Easter story to you? That it sounded like an idle tale and they didn't believe them. If you read on in the next verse, the last part of Luke's Easter story, it says that Peter left wondering to himself what had happened. If the resurrection is the linchpin of the Christian faith, the event that holds together everything we believe, doesn't that seem an odd way to end the Easter story? But all the Gospels include in their Easter stories an understanding that happened to many of the people in the first story. Gospel of Mark says that the women left and said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Matthew says the disciples saw the risen Jesus, but some doubted. The Gospel of John says that when Peter and the beloved disciple left the tomb, they still did not understand that Jesus had to rise from the dead. All of the Gospels make room for people who are not so sure about the resurrection. That stands out to me this year because of a few conversations, two, in fact, that I've had in the last couple of months. One was when Susan and I were with her niece. She is on the leadership board of the church that she is a part of, and she told how one Easter their pastor said in the sermon that you don't have to believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus. Now, that didn't bother her. She understood what he meant and what he was saying, that faith is bigger than belief in miracles. But still, to say that on Easter Sunday created a little bit of a stir in the church. Then the second conversation came just a few weeks ago with one of our leaders. The person said, I want to confess to you, Rob, I don't believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus. Now, I have a strong faith, but I believe God created the laws of nature and physics, and that God doesn't violate those laws. Now, I do know this person to be a person of deep faith, and in fact, I think it took a lot of courage to say that to me. And the reason I'm telling you about these conversations is not to critique or judge those folks. It's to say it got me to thinking, what do I believe? What do I really believe about the resurrection? What do you believe? This is my 15th Easter sermon here at St. Luke's, and I don't know that I've come clean with you before and told you plainly what I believe about Easter. I announced in January that I'll be retiring in a little over a year from now, so time is growing short for me to be able to do that. So I want to tell you today that I affirm the words of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in the resurrection of the body. For the next few minutes, I want to tell you why. But first, let us pray. Lord, speak through these feeble words of mine and help us to hear from that place deep within us where hope is formed. Amen. So I'm drawn to the Easter story in Luke's gospel. Luke was a doctor. We learn that from Paul's letter to the Colossians, which means as a physician, Luke would have been familiar with the processes of life and death, that when somebody dies, they stay that way. Yet, Luke the doctor affirmed with conviction that Jesus rose from the dead. And his followers experienced a risen Christ, and it changed them for the rest of their lives. That gets my attention. What else gets my attention is a question in Luke's Easter story that none of the other Gospels tell. When the women saw the evidence of the empty tomb, they are greeted by the angels who do not speak a proclamation about Easter. They speak a question. Why do you look for the living among the dead? Now, I think the question ought to go the other way around. Why do you look for the dead among the living? Because that's what they were doing. They were at the empty tomb to anoint a corpse. They weren't looking for anything living. They were expecting to find death. And so the question of the angels has a jarring effect to it, that in a place where they expect to find death, there's life. Now, the way Luke writes the question, why are you looking for the living? The jarring impact of the question is right up front. And I believe that there's a challenge buried beneath the question. Pun intended. Get it? Buried beneath. Folks, that's as funny as I'm going to get today, so might as well laugh right now. I think there's a sub-question. And the sub-question of the angels is, why aren't you looking for the living? Why are you looking for the dead? Why is that what you are expecting? Don't you remember what Jesus said to you? Seek the living. That's one of the reasons I believe in the resurrection of the body. Because it challenges me to look for more than what I expect to find. Do you find it's easy not to expect much these days? Do you get discouraged? Discouraged about our country? Discouraged about our world? Discouraged by situations maybe that happen in your life? I can get discouraged sometimes. My expectations can get pretty low. I can find myself going through life not expecting a whole lot, thinking to myself, things aren't ever going to change. Things are always going to be the same. The rich are going to trample on the poor. Big corporations will just do what they want to do anyway, and they'll get away with it. Well, it's just easy to go down that hole, isn't it? To just think the whole world is on fire and to believe that. But I believe in the resurrection of the body because Easter says that's a failure to believe. The question? Why do you seek the living among the dead is like a dare. It's a dare to challenge me to be open to the possibility that not only can God do more than I expect, but that God is right now. I understand it when people say that it intellectually is too far of a reach to believe in the historical reality of the resurrection. I understand that. But if God had the power to create the laws of the universe that we have, could that God not also have the power to transcend those laws? I believe that in nature, we can see little hints of that transcending power. Think about the caterpillar. Caterpillar is like a fuzzy little worm, but let it ball up into a cocoon and lose itself and go through a metamorphosis, and over about a week or so, it will emerge as a butterfly. Now, how do you explain that? Or think about starfish. A group of oyster fishermen one time discovered that starfish were ruining their beds. They found a way to fish out the starfish, and they cut them up into pieces and threw them back in the water. That took care of the problem, or so they thought. They did not realize that starfish have the power to regenerate. A piece of a starfish can grow into a whole new starfish. They made their problem worse by about 4 or 5 times. How do you explain that? I'm sure people can. I'm sure biologists can explain what happens to a caterpillar in a chrysalis, what happens to a piece of a starfish in salt water. We can explain it because we see it, we know it. But I believe those are examples of what we have yet to see and know. Dr. Leighton Farrell was a United Methodist pastor. He's deceased now. He performed Susan's and my wedding coming up on 35 years ago next month. Note to self. If you're clapping, make sure I remember next month. That would help me a lot. He wrote a book one time called Cries from the Cross. And in the book, he had this one line that has stuck with me for a lot of years. He said, all progress prior to experience is, for the most part, unbelievable. Now think about that. All progress prior to experience is unbelievable. Imagine if you said to somebody 100 years ago that human beings can fly to the moon, as we are doing again right now. Somebody 100 years ago would have found the idea laughable. They would have said impossible because they haven't experienced it. All progress prior to experience is unbelievable. And that might be the reason that we go through life only looking for what we expect to find. Only what we've experienced. But Easter dares us to believe that God can act beyond our expectation and do things that we currently right now would say are impossible. But let me tell you, that doesn't mean it makes life easier to believe that. In fact, it makes it harder in some ways. Because when you have that kind of hope, it means you're willing to be disappointed. Not everything you hope for happens. Not everything you believe that God can do and should do comes to pass. And to live with hope means to keep your heart vulnerable and open to being disappointed again and again and again. But every now and then, you find God showing up, doing something you cannot explain. And it will not only get you through life, it makes you alive. My friend James Howell wrote a devotional on the messianic titles in the book of Isaiah. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father. When he got to Everlasting Father, he shared very personally and in a way that revealed his own Easter hope. He said, I think of my father, a military hero and fine citizen who, as a dad, was distant, critical, and emotionally unreachable. We were not close. When he died, people glibly told me to enjoy the happy memories. I couldn't fish any out of my head. But hasn't the everlasting Father, with wonderful planning and great might, guaranteed there will be the day when we will meet once more, face to face, with hard layers peeled back, and we will embrace, shed tears, tell stories, and laugh robustly. Isn't that a wonderful thought? Isn't that a wonderful kind of description of what it means to live with hope? Something that we never got to see in this life. Something we would have never believed is possible, to believe there will be a day. That's why I believe in the resurrection of the body. Because I believe God can do that. And I believe I'll see a day like that. Seek the living. Another reason I believe in the resurrection of the body is because it makes me responsible. The writers of the Apostles' Creed chose their words carefully. They didn't just say, I believe in the resurrection. They said, I believe in the resurrection of the body. They did that to refute a popular heresy at the time. that said the material world, in other words, the world as we know it, is evil and inferior, and it is only the spirit world that's divine and good. In other words, everything of this world is not a part of God. And yet, one of the first truths in Scripture, you read it in Genesis 1, the creation of the heavens and the earth. Each day of creation, God looked at what God made, and it says, and saw that it was good. I believe in this idea of the resurrection of the body. It's affirming the goodness of God's creation. And that this world is not destined for some cosmic wastebasket one day. That God has an eternal purpose for this world. So go to the other end of the Bible, the book of Revelation. And the writer pictures that glorious day, that outcome of history. And the writer says, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Both together. A part of resurrection. So, what does a resurrected body look like? I don't think it'll look like a bad zombie movie. You know, if all God does is bring back these bodies of ours the way they are right now, brings back this world the way it is right now, what good is that? If it's not new and if it's not changed. Some of us are getting to a point where we're getting so frustrated with the things our bodies can't do anymore or doing wrong for us that the idea of forever having to live with it is not too hopeful. But resurrection combines both spiritual and physical. Paul talked about this, his great chapter on resurrection, 1 Corinthians 15. Paul, in fact, names the questions that people have about the resurrection. He says, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body will they come? And then he answers, if there's a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Resurrection is physical and it's spiritual. And what that means is it gives me a job right now because God has a permanent purpose for this world here and now. It means the way that I care for this planet matters. The way I care for my body matters. And the way I care for you and other people matters. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated 58 years ago yesterday. He had gone to Memphis to speak to sanitation workers who were protesting their low wages and their lack of rights. That was his last address that he gave. And in that address, he said these words, "It's all right to talk about long robes over yonder and all its symbolism, but ultimately people want some suits and dresses and shoes to wear down here. It's all right to talk about streets flowing with milk and honey, but God has commanded us to be concerned about the slums down here and his children who can't eat 3 square meals a day. It's all right to talk about the new Jerusalem, but one day God's preacher must talk about the new New York, the new Atlanta, the new Philadelphia, the new Los Angeles, the new Memphis, and I believe he would add, and the new Indianapolis. I believe in the resurrection of the body because it makes me responsible. It gives me a moral responsibility to do God's work here and now. And if all I ever teach you is about the good news of heaven that's one day going to wait on you, I have failed you. We have a job to do now. Seek the living. One last reason. I believe in the resurrection of the body. And this one's personal. It's not because it's something I can explain or prove, but it's something I can't deny. All of the Easter narratives tell of people who had the same experience but different reactions. Some believe, some don't. Those who believe seem to experience something, they don't know how to explain it or prove it, but yet they had an experience that they know they can't deny. I had that years ago. I've not told this story a whole lot in my ministry because honestly, I felt like it might sound kind of weird. It might sound a bit strange or super spiritual. So it's always been very personal to me, but it is something I can't deny. I was 17 wrestling with a call to ministry. I didn't know what to make of that. No one in my family had ever been in the ministry. My the pastor at my church helped me with understanding what it means, but still, how can one know? How can you prove if God is really calling you? And I couldn't find that evidence I needed. I went on a beach retreat with the youth in our church, and it was so disturbing me in my soul and spirit. I woke up early on a Sunday morning while it was still dark, and I decided to go for a walk on the beach. The horizon was just starting to get dim with light that was on the way. And as I was walking, I could make out a figure coming toward me. And when the figure got close enough, I could tell it was a man, not an old man, but older than me. When he got to me, he said, "Hey, do you mind if I walk with you?" I said, "No." So we walked, we introduced ourselves, we talked about where we were from, what we like about the beach. But what was odd about the conversation is how faith kept coming into it. He would look up at the horizon and say, "Oh, it's going to be a beautiful Lord's Day." As we kept walking, he would talk about what he believes. And he said, "You know, faith can be so frustrating sometimes. It's hard to know sometimes, but I've always found that when I trust God, I never regret it." Oh, it's going to be a beautiful Lord's Day, isn't it? We got to a certain point, and he said, "Well, I need to turn around now. Thanks for letting me walk with you. I'll be seeing you around." And he turned around. I kept walking thinking, that's just strange. Meeting some random person like that on the beach and faith coming up. And then he said, "I'll be seeing you around." I thought, I'm never going to see that guy again. And after about 20 feet, I stopped and I turned around. He was gone. I mean, folks, the beaches in South Carolina are really wide. That guy could not have run as fast as Jesse Owens and reached the sand dunes in time. And I thought, what was that? What was that? What if? What if that was God? What if that was an angel? I don't know. What if? And I went back to our camp. And I decided to live into what if. And for 46 years now, I've been asking that question every day. What if? What if God is who he says he is? What if Christ is alive? What if? And it demands something of me. It gives me a hope. What do you believe? What do you believe about Easter? What do you believe about resurrection?